Hi, I'm Elizabeth, the creator of Art Studio Life. Now I created a video painting tutorial for you here. I painted a tulip last week and I decided to create a video lesson out of it for you. Now whether or not you like painting flowers, they can actually be really helpful and you can learn a lot from them. They have a very specific structural shape and there's always lots of subtle changes in the values and colors that happen in them. Now you can paint along with me or just simply watch and learn. And scroll down to leave any comments or questions that you might have. Enjoy! The very first thing I do to create my tulip flower painting is to create a small sketch using a very neutral, light colored paint. Now I'm painting this tulip from real life, meaning that I have the real tulip right in front of me and I'm looking at it as I'm painting. Now I took a photograph of what I painted from so that you can get an idea of what I was looking at. Now the photograph might look a little bit different from what I'm painting, and that's just because the angle is just slightly different and the lighting, and photographs just can never capture exactly what we are able to see with our human eye. This sketch that I'm creating in the beginning here is not meant to be a completely accurate drawing of what I will be painting. It's simply meant to get the basic architecture and basic idea of what I will be painting. I will adjust and fix different things in the drawing and measurements that need to be done later on during the process of the painting. Now I start applying my first color in the center part of the tulip, and I will work myself out from the inside part of the flower to the outside part. You can see here how my sketch comes in handy as I'm able to know where to apply this dark pink color. To get this color, I mixed some alizarin crimson with phthalo green and some ultramarine blue and then a little bit of cadmium red. I also mixed in a little bit of lead white since the color needed to be lightened up just a little bit. Now with most of that dark pink color in the center part of the tulip down, I can now move my attention towards another area, which is just right in front of that, and it's a slightly lighter, pinker color. But since the color didn't quite look right, I decided to scrape it out using my palette knife, and I mixed up a new different color that was a little less purple. If a color isn't working for you in a painting, it's really important to just get rid of it right away and mix up a new color. Now to get this slightly lighter rosy color, I mixed some alizarin crimson again with phthalo green, but then also mixed in some more cadmium red, but also some orange and a little bit of yellow. But I mixed in a lot more lead white than I did for my dark red color that's in the center part of the tulip. Here I deal with the subtlety and I mix up a very slightly darker pink color and I apply that to that right side of that petal. Now my palette knife isn't just good for scraping out paint, but it's also good for drawing with. So here I'm making a more clear outline of the edge part of that petal. The tip of my palette knife allows me to draw and scrape away paint. I make the right side of the petal a little bit darker by applying a slightly darker pink color to that area. Now I apply a slightly brighter pink color that's directly next to this other petal that I was working on earlier. I work in areas that are directly next to one another because in that way I can mix up colors that actually work together in the way that I am seeing them in real life. Now this color that I'm applying right now is a slightly more saturated deep pink color. And I can tell that because of the other colors that it is surrounded by. It is more bright than these other colors. Now as I paint, I'm really simplifying what I'm looking at and how I'm painting it. And I'm trying to find the large color spots. So basically that means is I'm trying to find the large areas that are the same color. And right here on this petal, most of this petal is the same color. And so I'm painting most of that area this same bright saturated pink. But at the same time, I'm also working on other areas around it, like right now, that dark area that is inside the tulip. I'm able to now go back to that area because there's more areas I can now work with. I am now able to refine the edges of that new petal that I just painted down. With my palette knife, I can work with and refine the edges of other areas as well. For example, right here, I'm using my palette knife to kind of fix the edges of that front petal, and I'm trying to make them sharper and a little bit lighter in value by scraping away just a tiny bit of paint. My palette knife is also useful for smoothing out areas, like right here. I smooth out that area that's on the front part of the petal. I use my dark pink color now to expand the area in the center part of the tulip, and at the same time I'm also finding the edges of the petals that are around the tulip. I now expand into painting not just the very dark pink area, the inside part of this tulip, but also the slightly lighter, but still dark and very saturated and bright pink color that's on the left inner part of the tulip. When you're painting flowers, you're always going to deal with subtle changes in colors and also values, and this inside part of the tulip is one really great example of just that. When painting subtle different changes in colors and values, it comes with mixing up different versions of that. And here, it just didn't work out so well, so I scraped out that color because it just didn't fit. And I went back to my palette and mixed up a different version of that color that's slightly a little bit darker and slightly brighter, but it also didn't work well. So I scraped that color away as well. As you can see, it's a process of constantly trying out different versions of a color, and you just put it right on your canvas, and if it works, you keep it, and if it doesn't, you scrape it away. A color will always look very different on your palette than it does on your actual painting. Here, I now settle on a color that works well. It has a good contrast between the dark part of the inner portion of the tulip and then that outer part of the petal. Now I create a little more contrast between the inner dark part of the tulip and the petal by applying a slightly lighter pink color to that area. Here's another example of using my palette knife to refine the drawing aspect, so the measuring part of my painting. And here I kind of look at that edge and see that it needs to go a little further out than it was. Now I take some slightly darker pink color and I apply it along that edge that I just created of the petal that's in the front. I apply more of my darker pink color to much of the left portion of the petal. As you can see, it is slightly darker than that middle section of the petal, and this helps to create more dimension in the tulip. I darken the color just a little bit more, and I apply that color to the bottom portion of this petal, as the base part of the flower is a little bit darker. As I said earlier, when painting flowers, you're dealing with a really subtle color and value changes. And this is just a great example of that again, of how these subtle color changes really make a big impact to create dimension and also to create volume in a painting. I now apply more of my darker pink color also to the right side of this petal as well. Once again, my palette knife comes in handy to get rid of some extra paint that is unnecessary. Like right here on the left upper portion of my painting, I'm able to scrape away a lot of paint that really is not needed in the painting. This also allows me to more properly draw the shape of this flower as well. The flat side of my palette knife also helps me to soften some of the edges on the inside part of the tulip. I simply rub the flat portion of my palette knife against my painting. I now grab some of my dark pink color and I'm able to go and return back to that inside portion of the tulip, and I'm able to refine and become more specific about all the different edges and areas that are inside there, and I'm able to pay attention to the edges of the petals. That is, those ridges that are at the top part of the petals. I highlight the top portion of the front petal by mixing up a slightly lighter pink color paint, and I apply that to that front ridge area of the petal. I also pay attention to the lighter highlight that is on the right side of the tulip on the upper portion of the petal. I mix up a deeper pink color now and I return to the left side of the tulip and I paint out that area. I then add a slightly lighter pink color that's just beneath the color that I just applied. However, since the color doesn't work, I scrape it away using my palette knife. I again use my palette knife to scrape away paint that is unnecessary to leave on my painting. And when doing this, I'm also working towards trying to find the shape of the tulip and creating that edge of the outer portion of the tulip. Now I do a little more work with edges here, and I work at softening some edges and hardening others. Now, when I create soft edges, it helps for it to recede further back into the background area of the painting. So when I soften this area that I just am doing now, it makes it look like it's further back in space than the front petal area. I can soften edges by using my palette knife or also using my finger. When I use my finger, it looks like I'm smudging. I take a rag and wipe away the paint in this area, since I will eventually apply a different color paint over this spot, and I don't want this pink color to get mixed in with that other color that I will be applying to that part. Now I'm applying a new color. Well, it's not quite new since I'm really just using all the different shades that I've mixed up throughout the process of this painting. But I mix in more new colors into this new shade that I'm applying here. It's a slightly darker and also brighter pink because it is a shadow reflection from the far right petal that's on the right side of the painting. Again, I'm painting this from life, and I'm not painting it from a photograph that you see here on the left. I'm painting it the real version of the tulip, so the photograph is different than what I actually saw in real life. It's the same tulip, but it's at a slightly different angle, and also the lighting is just slightly different in the photograph. Here I'm making the edge between the front petal, the top front part of the petal, and the petal that's to the right of it, definitely sharper than it was before. And I'm doing this by making it slightly darker since that top part of the front petal is lighter in value. And when I create a greater value contrast, it makes a sharper edge. It makes it stand out more than it was before. Now I return back to using that very dark pink color that's in the inside part of the tulip, and I apply it now to that right side upper portion of the painting. As you can see, when I apply this, it helps to define the shape of the flower. Here I once again use my thumb to soften the edge and the inner portion of the tulip. I now apply just a very slightly lighter dark pink color in the center part of the tulip. There's just a very slight variation in the center part of the tulip between a very dark pink color and then just a very slightly lighter pink color. This can't be seen very well in the photograph, but in real life it showed up very clearly to me. I now measure out where the end part of the tulip is, and I use my palette knife to mark it out, and I scrape away some paint so that I can easily identify the area, and I start to draw out the other edge of the tulip. Here I'm making sure that the top part of the tulip is lining up where it should on the bottom part, and I'm just seeing if I need to adjust some areas a little bit. If areas need to be changed or moved around, it's better to do this in the beginning than later on in the painting, where you have to change things a lot more. Now, when trying to get rid of unnecessary paint and paint that I don't need on my canvas with just my palette knife, I'm not able to get rid of everything. So that's why I also use a rag to wipe away some of that unnecessary paint. And I get my rag a little bit wet with some linseed oil because this really helps to get rid of a lot of the paint and it helps to clean up that canvas more. Now I'll probably return to that area at the top part of my painting that still has a lot of pink smeared over it to clean it up more, but for now I'm going to return to my tulip again and figure out the measurements and drawing of the different parts to make sure that everything is accurate. After having refined and really figured out where the boundary and edge of the top part of the tulip is, I now can move forward and wipe away more of that pink color that's kind of washed over on the top part of my painting. Again, dipping my rag into some linseed oil helps to really make it more clean and helps to wipe away more of the paint than if I were to just use a clean rag that didn't have any linseed oil or mineral spirits on it. I work on painting the petal that's on the left side more, and I have a lighter pink color that's muted, but it's a little bit brighter than the color that I had there before, and I apply that to the top part. And I pay attention to that highlight that is there at the top part of the petal. I also pay attention to a highlight that's on the right side of the flower. I apply some of that muted pink light color that I mixed up earlier. And as I move into and paint in different areas, I will always continually draw and measure out that specific area and make sure that things are in the places that they need to be, just like I'm doing here. And as I'm at it, I'm also scraping away some paint because this helps me to kind of draw in that area. I now apply a slightly darker, but still very bright and saturated color that's directly to the right of that light highlight that I applied to that top part of the petal. This is because it's part of that inside portion of the tulip, which is much darker. To get this color, I mixed some alizarin crimson with a little bit of phthalo green, and then also some cadmium red, and I mixed in a small amount of lead white to the color. And as I talked about before, and as I've done throughout the process of this painting, I soften the edges where they need to be soft using that flat side of my palette knife. And I sharpen them where they need to be sharper using the tip end of my palette knife. Now I work at darkening the petal that's on the right side of the flower. But I just darken the lower part of it, since the upper part of the petal is a little bit lighter in value. I soften the edges using my thumb to just smooth out the area. Now since the shadow that I created earlier has now been wiped away and isn't there anymore since I made the lower part of the petal darker, I now need to mix up a darker color to create that shadow part that you can see that's on the petal. Now this shadow area is of course a shadow reflection from the petal that's right next to it. And now scrape away some of the paint because of course the tulip doesn't extend down that far. The tulip petal that is. So I scrape away some of that to fix some of the drawing and measuring aspect of it. I'll return to the area later to get rid of more of that paint that I'm not able to completely scrape away with just my palette knife. Now I measure and figure out where the next petal starts. And so I scrape away some of that paint because I'll be painting over that spot with a new shade of pink to paint the new petal. As you can see, this new petal color that I'm applying is slightly lighter than that shadow reflection that I just painted down just before this. Now I'll continue to apply this really rich pink color to the rest of the petal area here on the right side. On my palette, I mix a very small amount of white into my pink color, and I apply this to the lower part of the petal, since this area is just slightly lighter. Again, the change is very subtle, but it's still very important. Now with the color applied, I can return my attention to the drawing and measuring aspect of my painting, and I scrape away the area that doesn't need to be there because I measured out the shape of the lower part of the flower. I take my rag that has some linseed oil on it and I use it to wipe away some of that paint that doesn't need to be there. After looking and comparing the petals that are on the right side of my flower, I noticed that the petal in the middle needs to be just a little bit darker. So I take some of my dark pink color that's on my palette and I apply it to the lower part of the petal. I now lighten the color very slightly on my palette by mixing in a very small amount of lead white into the color, again, first on my palette before I apply it to my painting. As mentioned before, it very often takes much more than just one try to get a color right, so don't feel bad if you have to keep on changing and mixing different colors up. I darken the top part of the petal now since it needs to be a little bit darker than it was before. While going through a painting, it's really important to pay much more attention to value than to color. Of course, color is always important and always will be important, but it is the value, the light and dark values of your painting that will really give it a sense of light. Now I move further left and turn my attention towards the petal that's in the front part of the painting, and I darken the lower part of it since it needs to be a little bit darker. As I've done before, I continue to use my palette knife here to scrape away some paint and to kind of draw the edge of the tulip and figure out also where some sharp edges are. I also clean up some of the paint on the bottom part of the painting by wiping it away with my rag that has a little bit of linseed oil on it. Now I'm going to turn my attention towards something really exciting. I'm going to paint the background part of the painting. When painting the main subject of something on your painting, it's important to not just paint it by itself, but to at the same time do the background and the subject both together, because in this way you're able to relate the colors better together and able to change things if they need to be changed. When you work on the subject and the background both at the same time, they will really go together much better and it'll feel natural, like it's a natural part of the painting. If you don't do this, it's really easy for the subject to actually just look like a paper cutout, that it doesn't really belong in the painting. As you can see, I'm applying kind of a whitish, bluish color. It looks a little bluish because it's a very cool white. To mix it up, I mixed some ultramarine blue with cadmium orange and then mixed a lot of white into it. Now I mixed orange and blue together because orange will mute the blue. Now if I just mix blue into my white, it would just turn into a really, really light, bright blue color. But since I don't want that, I muted that color with some orange. And that works because orange is the opposite color of blue and will make the blue look a little bit less blue. Now as I lay down my white bluish background color, I'm careful to apply it along the edge of the flower. I get it right up to where the edge is and I don't leave any space to show the white of the canvas, but I'm careful not to get into the pink color because I don't want any of that pink color to get into my light blue background color. Now as I lay down this very whitish bluish background color, I continue to get rid of some of the paint that I will be applying this white color over because I don't want the colors to get mixed into each other. I used my palette knife here to help me to really create a very clean edge around the edge of the tulip, between the tulip and the background that is. Now with a lot of the background down on the left side of the painting, I now turn my attention towards painting part of the stem that's at the bottom part of the painting. On my palette, I mix up a regular green color using cadmium yellow, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of white into the color. I scrape away my first attempt of the color and I go back and remix a color on my palette. I keep on adjusting my green color by mixing in more yellow to make it warmer, and then also making it a little bit lighter by mixing in more lead white. But just mixing in also more yellow helps to make the color lighter as well. After trying all those different versions of green though, I decide that none of them work really well, so I scrape it out and I apply an even lighter yellowish green color over the top. If a color isn't working well, it's much better to just scrape it off of your canvas and then apply your newly mixed color on top of that. Because if you just apply a new mixed color on top of an old color that's on your canvas, it's just going to mix in with the old color and it's not going to show up the way that you want it to. I continue to adjust the color of this flower stem just a little bit by making it a little warmer. And I do this by mixing a little bit more yellow even, and also a little bit of orange into my green color that's on my palette, and then I apply this slightly adjusted color onto the stem part of my flower. Since the lower part of the stem is a little lighter in value, I mixed up a lighter green by mixing up some lead white into my green color on my palette, and then I apply this to the lower part of the stem. Now I grabbed the same brush that I used for the background part of the painting, and I grabbed some more of my background white bluish color, and I continue to apply more just along the edge of the tulip, and I try to bring it down towards where the stem starts. I then push up the green color of my stem and I move it towards where the base of the flower is. And I'm trying to really incorporate this stem into the flower to make it have a natural feel and to make it feel like it is actually part of the flower. I decide to lighten the green that's at the top part of the stem as well. So I grab the same brush that I used for the stem earlier, my green brush, and then I mixed in a little bit of lead white and also some yellow into that color and apply it to the area. But since the color still didn't work out well enough, I scrape that area away and I go back to my palette. As I mentioned earlier, if a color really isn't working out so well, it's much better to just get rid of it, scrape it away, and then apply your newly mixed color onto the area, since it's then not getting mixed up with the color that was already there. As you can see, my newly mixed green at the top part of the stem is warmer and also a little bit lighter than the color that was there before. Now I bring up my palette knife again to create the drawing and measure out the form of the stem part of the flower. Alright, now that I have some of that paint scraped away, it makes way for me to apply my new green color, which is actually for the real stem of this tulip that I painted. The green area that I was painting before was just actually the leaf part of the tulip. And since the stem is a little bit darker in value than the leaf, I mixed up a darker green on my palette. And to do this, I took the green that I mixed up earlier and mixed in some phthalo green and alizarin crimson into the color. Since the right side of the stem is much darker than the left side because it's It has a bit of a shadow area on it, I mix a very slightly lighter color for the left part of the stem. To do this, I mix in some lead white and then also some alizarin crimson into my already mixed up dark green color. The reason why I mix in alizarin crimson with my dark green color is because it is a reddish color, and whenever you mix in red with green, it will make the green a little bit less green and more muted. And in this case, the green is a little more muted and it's also warmer. So mixing in some red will help with both of those. Now I take a break from working on the stem part of the flower and I move my attention towards the background again and I look towards the right side of the painting. Now it's good to always move around the painting and work on different areas just for the same reason like I mentioned before. It's good to work on different parts at the same time because you want the whole painting to work well together. If you just work on one part, it's going to look very separate from the rest of the painting once you get around to those other parts. But when you continually work on all the parts at the same time, they'll really mesh together much better. Now this background area isn't the white bluish background, but rather it's actually the tulip that I'm painting right now that's right next to my pink flower. Now I don't plan to actually paint out this tulip in full. I'm just going to leave it as a color spot that's next to this pink tulip. As I've done before, I scrape away some paint on the top part of the tulip here to draw out the shape of the tulip and also to get rid of some of that paint because I plan on painting it over with this white tulip color that's right next to the tulip. Now with my palette knife, I scrape away part of the area of the inside part of the tulip. And I'm just creating that shape that that petal has on the back. I wipe away some of the remaining paint with my rag because I don't want any of my background color to get mixed in with this pink color. On my palette, I mixed in a little bit of white into my whitish tulip color, and now I'm applying this to this area where the light is hitting the tulip. I smooth out some of that paint that I applied for this white tulip that's just directly to the right of my pink tulip. And I also scrape away some of the paint to just create the shape of the bottom part of the tulip. Now since that top area of the white tulip is not light enough, I scrape away the area with my palette knife and then I apply a lightened version of the same color. And I just lighten that same color that I used earlier by mixing in more white to it. I then grab some of my other background color that belongs to the bluish white area of the background and I apply that carefully next to the white tulip area and also carefully along the edge of the top part of my pink tulip. Now I scrape away some of the paint that's at that top part of the tulip since I'm adjusting it just a little bit since it starts slightly lower than where it is right now. I also soften the edges between the stem of the flower, then also the flower itself. This really helps to make it feel like it's part of the flower, not a separate cutout piece. With my rag dipped into a little bit of linseed oil, I'm able to wipe away some of that paint that's now on the bottom right part of the tulip. Since I find that the far right petal needs to be slightly lighter in value, I use my palette knife to just scrape away a little bit of the paint. The palette knife can be very useful when you need to make an area just slightly lighter because it just takes away a light part of the paint. You just have to be careful not to press that hard because if you press too hard, then it's going to take away too much paint. Now I move on to applying my whitish blue background color that's on the bottom right part of the tulip. But at the same time, I also work on scraping away some paint that doesn't need to be there. I don't want my white bluish color to get mixed up with pink paint, of course, because it will really affect it quite a lot. Now with most of that pink paint gone in the bottom part of the tulip, I can now apply more of my whitish blue background color to that area, as I'm doing just right now, you can see. I also continue to use my palette knife to refine the shape of that bottom part of the flower. I now turn my attention towards painting more of the leaf that's behind the stem area and it's to the right side of the stem. Now I use some of the same green color that I used earlier for the leaf area that's on the left side of the stem. And I apply this to now the right area. I use the same color, but I adjust it just a little bit by mixing in a little bit more blue to make it slightly darker. Now I bring up this green color right up to the bottom, the base part of the tulip, to make it feel like it's really part of the flower. Now I use my palette knife to scrape away some paint and draw out where I will be painting down that leaf that's on the right side of the tulip. I begin here by applying a warm green color to that area. I used the same green color that I used earlier for the other leaf area on the right side of the stem, but I mixed in some more yellow and orange to make it even warmer. Since it's a very rich green color, I mix in some cadmium green into my green mixture on my palette, and I apply that to this leaf area on the painting. Now the right side of this leaf area is a little bit darker and also cooler in temperature, so I mix in a little bit of blue into my green to make it more of a greenish blue, or I should say a bluish green. Now I make the color even darker by going to my palette and I mix in a small amount of phthalo green into the color as well, and then I apply that to this leaf part of the painting. I want to be sure that I'll capture that subtle shadow area that's on the right side of this leaf. Alright, now I think I've made the area sufficiently dark enough for it to really feel like a shadow area on this leaf. I then soften the edge just a little bit by using the flat side of my palette knife. I proceed further now by making the left side of this leaf a little bit lighter, since it is slightly lighter than the right side, of course. I play around with the green color a little bit and apply a slightly cooler green color to that left side of the leaf to see if that might fit a little better. Since I see that it does work well, I apply more of this cool green color to that area. I now paint in the rest of the upper part of the leaf by finding the very edge of it at the top. I now grab more of that darker green color in my palette that I used earlier, and I apply this again to the right side of the leaf, but now at the top part of the leaf. Now I just continue to apply more of that dark green color to this upper portion of the leaf until I cover most of it. I mixed up a brighter, more brilliant green color on my palette. Now I'm applying this to the far right side of my leaf to make it just brighter and more saturated. Now I lighten my green color slightly by mixing a little bit of lead white into my green color, then applying it to the right side of the leaf. I needed to lighten it just a little bit since it had gotten just a little bit too dark. After some observing of the colors and the values of this leaf, I realized that I need to make it just a little bit darker than I have been making it. So I mix up an even darker green color and I apply this to the same area that I worked on before. If you ever notice a value being just a little bit off or feeling like it needs to be changed, just go ahead and change it, because it's better to do it right in the moment than to have to do a lot of different fixing later on. I mixed a little bit of red into my dark green color in my palette, and I used this color to create that shadow area that goes over top the leaf, that's on the bottom part of the leaf. Now my palette knife comes in handy once again. With my palette knife, I'm able to find the edge of the leaf that's on the left side. I apply a much lighter but also very muted green color right on the area where I scraped away some paint. I decide that the green color that I applied doesn't really work so well, so I scrape it away, but in the meantime, while I scrape it away, I also define that edge and make it sharper. The edge that is that shadow part on the leaf that's to the right. I apply a slighter, lighter version of the green color that I used earlier. And now I'll make my green color slightly brighter and also more saturated by mixing some cadmium green into the color and apply this to the upper part of the stem. Since the far left edge of this leaf is a little bit lighter in value, I just apply a very thin strip of light green to the area. I go back to my palette once again and mix up a darker green color that's much cooler than the color that I was using previously. This color represents the cooler and slightly darker leaf that's at the bottom part of the painting. I continue to apply my dark green color to the rest of the leaf area at the bottom. I make the far right side of this lower leaf just slightly lighter in value by mixing in a little bit of lead white, then also a little bit of light purple color. In turn, I make that far left side of the leaf just slightly darker in value. It's very subtle, but you can see that it is just a little bit darker. I use my finger to soften the edge just a little bit between the slightly lighter value and the darker value of the leaf. Doing that helps to create a smoother transition between the two areas. I hope this video inspired you to continue painting your flower, or perhaps paint some more flowers. You can find more tutorials and lessons at artstudiolife.com.